It was wonderful. Each performance is different. And this was one school. And I think it was magical that one school could do so many things. When I wrote it first, it was for at least 6 schools and one Landesjugendorchester. So it was a big performance for many, perhaps 200 children. And this was just one school. And so I think it's an amazing performance for one school. And I really enjoyed it. Well, I started my life, professional life, as a teacher, just like Herr Jakob. And I have had to organize operas, and I had to paint the scenery and direct and all those things. So I know how hard a job it is, even to moving the chairs and the Notenstände and so on. And that's how I started my life. Then I became a teacher trainer, and then I became a university professor, and then until 2 years ago I was working at the Conservatorium in London, at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where I was head of research. So I have done many things, but always in music and education.
When did you go into composing?
Well, when I was about 13 or something like that, I think. I lived in the east of England, and near me was the great composer Benjamin Britten. And he lived near me. And he made this festival at the little seaside town of Aldborough. And I used to go there on my bicycle and listen to the music. I couldn't afford to buy a ticket, so I could listen outside. And then my school was asked to sing in a choir for Benjamin Britten. And I went to the rehearsal, and I heard him rehearsing his own music. And this was like a bolt of lightning coming into my head. And from that moment on, I said, I want to be a composer. And I started to write music. Well, I was asked to write it for a festival in the north of England, in a town called Ashington, which was a mining town with many working people. So opera was not their thing. And they wanted an opera that would involve as many children as possible. And it's an area where is the monastery of Lindisfarne, where the Lindisfarne Gospels are. And so it was a center of Celtic thought. So I started thinking Celtic. And I looked Celtic verse, Celtic poems. And then I came across the Mabinogion, which is the Welsh Celtic collection of wonderful stories. And they were written sometime around about the 11th or 12th century. And in this book, I started to read it, and I came across the story of Peridot. And in this story were all sorts of things. There was the Castle of Wonders with the live chess game playing. This is in Peridot. And also there was many things like the tree, for instance, a tree with flame on one side and leaf on the other. And he had many adventures. And at the court of King Arthur, he saw some of the knights were bullying. It was actually a dwarf, a small man. And the knights were being unkind to him. So Peridot stepped in and stopped them. And they didn't like it. And so that was where this story started for me. But also this story is about me as a child. So we have the Welsh legend there, but we also have my story. And I was Peridot. I was a boy who wanted to do things different from other boys. I wanted to write music, and they didn't like that. And once I was caught by a gang, and I wasn't beaten, but I became very frightened, and they threatened me, and then they let me go. And I've remembered that always. And as I said to the audience this evening, music was my way of finding my path to adulthood. And so all this is in the opera. Yes. And that's almost accidental, because Wagner's Parsifal is a very different thing, and it's very religious. Now, Peridot is not a religious opera, but the first performance in Hamburg in 1995, somebody came to me afterwards and said, with tears in their eyes, and they said, this was the coronation of the Virgin Mary. And he told me all the religious symbols that were in the opera. I didn't know. But he could see them. So this is what I mean when you write a little piece of paper and you send it off like a paper aeroplane or a ship, and you don't know where it will go or what will happen to it. And people can see all sorts of things in it. And that pleases me, because I don't know whether that's there or not. But it is a moral tale. And it says that you will always find a way if you search within yourself and become yourself. You have skills and you use them. And that's what Perry learnt.
How did you go about composing an opera to be performed by children?
Well, I have written nearly all my pieces have been for children. This is a speciality which very few composers are interested in. I think people think it's very easy to write music for children, but in fact it's a very, very difficult thing to do, because you always want to write something which is new, which will interest the children, but that will also give them an educational challenge. So whatever age group, the youngest piece I've ever written was for 5-year-olds. And that was at a big festival with maybe 500 5-year-olds. And it was the story of Baba Yaga, the Russian fairy tale. And that was published in a little booklet, and I drew all the pictures in there. So I've written many things for children. And they've been performed in many places. The last time I conducted children like this was in the Royal Albert Hall with 2,100 children playing and singing in a piece of mine called Odysseus. And that was my last conducting job.
That was a big production.
Yeah, it was a big production. And in 2001, I went to Australia to give a lecture. And a teacher came to me and she said, "Oh, I'm so pleased to meet you. Last year at Sydney Opera House, we played your Inca piece." I didn't know. Because I wasn't on Twitter then. Well, did you know that the children here found me on Facebook? Kai Jacobs wanted to find me, and he had telephone numbers that were old, and he tried and he tried. And then some children came to him and said, "He's still alive because he's on Facebook." And Kai didn't know what Facebook was. So if it wasn't for this, I was given this for my 70th birthday by my wife. And so Facebook got me to Kai Jacobs, and then you told me about the performance on Twitter. This shows you the power of the internet. Well, this was the one opportunity I had to write a real opera. And I knew that most of the people playing and singing would never have been to an opera. So I wanted to build into it those things that you find in a real opera, in a grown-up opera. So there are themes for each character, and there is a theme right through it. So many of the melodies are built from one old melody called Summer Is a Comin' In, which you don't hear in this version. But last year I wrote a new version of Peridot, which was to be performed in Osnabrück, but then the performance was cancelled. So I still haven't heard the new version of Peridot. So there is a new Peridot out there somewhere. And maybe I will hear it and maybe I won't. Well, you have to make certain that you have enough instrumentalists and singers. Well, what I liked about this was that the instrumentalists were also singers, and they moved around, and I think that's wonderful, that they played many parts. And it doesn't matter, the piece doesn't matter. What the most important thing is the experience. And that's something which you will never be able to capture exactly on a video or on an acoustic recording. It's impossible. There's something about the atmosphere and the sense of purpose, and there's an electricity in the communication that the music makes, which recordings can never capture. And that's why live music making is always so important. And that's what these children were experiencing. And that's why I wrote it, because I want them to have something to enjoy and to make them want to go on making music. And can I tell you a story? This evening, a young lady came to me and she said, "You won't remember me, but I was the youngest performer in the Hamburg performance in 1995. She said, "I had never sung before." And she started to cry and she said, "It changed my life." That makes all the work that I do worthwhile.
Wonderful. So, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.